Hundreds of horror movies are released worldwide every year with a wide range of stories and budgets, but most of these are crushed under the big budget Hollywood studio films for their lack of accessibility and hype. So in today's video, we're going to discuss the 13 most terrifying movies available on Netflix that will leave a mark on you for a long time due to their unique and chilling stories. Now, just before we go into the video, please like and subscribe to our channel for a daily dose of entertainment. Come on now. Okay, let's go. The Ritual 2017. If you're not scared of the idea of getting lost in the woods at night, this movie might be the perfect guide for you to invite all of your worst nightmares out to play, because the woods have a way of getting under your skin, especially if you throw in a dash of ancient cults and unknown rituals that might invite unseen horrors into your heart. After the death of their friend in an accident, a bunch of guys plan to go on a hike into the remote Scandinavian wilderness to commemorate his last wish. Everything seems fun and games at first until they find an abandoned cottage in the woods. Now let's be clear, we all know that these cabins are never a good idea. And of course this is where things get a bit more scary, because it turns out the guys are not alone up there. Some ancient creatures from Norse mythology begin to play silly games with them. After a series of cat and mouse and some gruesome deaths, yes, some heavy blood shit death, the characters need to find their own way to either accept their fate or just die at the hands of this creature. Filmed in the mystic forests of Romania and directed by ace horror film director David Bruckner, who has directed films like The Signal, The Night House and the 2020 remake of Hellraiser, well, he has a unique way of building an eerie atmosphere throughout his movies. With this movie he creates a gritty, scary, spine-chilling narrative with a lot of graphic scenes that could be a little bit too much for some audiences, but at the end you'll be asking yourself, do you really ever want to go camping again? Eli 2019. Satan has been an integral part of countless mythological stories, modern novellas, plays and horror movies that love to portray him as the eponymous villain. But in this twisted and squeakily exciting movie, we get to see the power of his offspring, and it will make you question your obsession with Marvel superheroes. Eli starts off more of a superhero movie than a standalone horror flick, because the protagonist, a boy named Eli, is shown to be suffering from a rare disease that makes him allergic to the human environment. After much research, his parents, Rose and Paul, find a facility operated by a doctor named Isabella Horn, who assures both of Eli's parents that she can truly cure him of his allergies. Considering this is the last hope for their child, his parents enroll Eli into the facility at once. But soon after, Eli begins to experience demonic activities all around him. It may not be the most terrifying movie of all time, but Eli has everything you'd expect from a true horror movie. Jump scares, a thrilling story, top-notch acting, and some genuine horror moments. His House 2020. This 2020 British horror thriller tells the story of a refugee couple from South Sudan who flee their home country amid the dangerous war. But all of their hope and ambitions soon turn to ashes when the British authorities capture them for trespassing into the British Isles illegally. After a brief period, they're allotted a home on the outskirts of London with a warning to show their very best behaviour or face deportation. But once they move into the house, as in every horror film, the terror begins to unfold and the couple faces some horrifying events. This movie might be one of the most underrated films of all, because it's not just a regular horror flick that deals with demonic possession or some psychopath villain trying to tear the leads a new one, but it genuinely tries to showcase the terror of human conditions, the idea of displacement, racism and traumatic experiences of refugees who come in search of a better life, losing their homeland and cultural identity along the way. All that remains is the feeling of belonging under the shadow of a demon called Apeth. This movie also contains an exciting twist showing how selfish humans indeed have become just to fulfill their own goals. If you really want to see some petrifying stuff, His House should be on your watch list. Girl on the Third Floor 2019. Believe it or not, many people believe that houses have their own personalities, much like humans. Some are warm and inviting, whereas some can be cunning and destructive. And in this 2019 film directed by Travis Stevens, we get to see one example of this theory. A man named Don moves into an old house with his pregnant wife Liz and their dog Cooper. Coming from a lower financial background, he starts renovating his home independently, but suddenly he begins experiencing some strange events throughout the house, like seeing a sludge-like substance on the wall and finding marbles all around the ground. Don is slowly forced to confront his demons and criminal past by the ghost of a lady named Sarah. His troubled past continuously haunts him, revealing a pattern of deception, infidelity, and betrayal. Though The Girl on the Third Floor seems like an easy movie, it's a haunting story, or the consequence of moral issues and the danger that cause it. It acts as a metaphor for Don's past and how Don suffers from his past. His attempt to bury his past is shown repeatedly in grotesque images like dead bodies stuffed into the walls of the house. This movie also makes a bold statement that every action has its consequence, and our past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how hard we try to hide it under the rug. Hush, 2016. Written and directed by the Tolkien of horror movies, Mike Flanagan, Hush entirely depends on silence to project the terrifying story of a deaf writer, Madison Young. After writing her hit horror novel Midnight Mass, a reference to Flanagan's own film, she moves into the woods and lives in a secluded house to find inspiration for her next novel. But while she spends her time looking for a thrill, she finds herself in grave danger as a psychopath killer begins hunting her down. It's a fresh take on the slasher genre, as unlike other serial killers, this crazy psychopath doesn't hold back to reveal his face in the middle of the frenzy. He likes to tease the protagonist and challenge her, knowing that she's not capable of fighting him because of her deformities as a deaf and dumb girl. But like every slasher queen, Maddie shows her true colours as a fighter who skillfully demonstrates herself and manages to fight the killer without giving up. Utilising his weapon of choice, a crossbow, the killer loves to play weird killer game. Filled with some genuine horror moments and magnificent sound designing. Considering that the movie does not use any sound for its 70-minute run, it's amazing to watch. If you're still doubtful about Hush, I should remind you that Stephen King once dubbed it as his favourite in the current lineups of horror movies.
I need help.
Gerald's Game, 2017. If you haven't seen this movie, you'll need to drop all your weekend plans and turn to Netflix, because you're gonna fall in love with it. It's another Mike Flanagan piece on our list, and it's a terrifying tale of searching for one's identity. I'm sure it will inspire and make you root for the protagonist at all costs. When Jessie and her husband Gerald arrive at the private residence in an undisturbed locality for an exploration into the kinky to spice up their marriage, a minor accident turns their lives upside down. Gerald ties Jessie to the bed for pleasure, but his excessive use of the blue chew pills take his life in the form of a heart attack. Tied to the bed, Jessie needs to figure out her ways of escaping the situation to save her own life, because if she can't, she'll face death all alone. It's just a brilliant story, beautifully translated into the horrifying scenes of the movie, and you'll be pushed to the limits by the protagonist herself. The decisions she makes to save her own life are a tale of empowerment, because she has to overcome a traumatic past, a troubled childhood, and psychological scares to discover the inner strength and resilience she never knew she possessed. This movie is a must-watch.
Over there now! You! Back in that corner! I'll kill you!
The Platform, 2019. When a man named Goreng wakes up in a pit-like experimental prison for 6 months in exchange for a college degree, he finds out that all the promises made to him are fake. He has instead volunteered for some psychopathic game-like facility where people are being held captive in a tower with a countless number of platforms. The inmates randomly switch platforms and floors every month, and the food they receive is never enough for the entire building, so a lot of them are forced to kill their inmates just to satisfy their hunger. Goreng also takes part in this vicious game after a few days of resistance, but he makes some valuable friends who, along with him, plan to leave the facility at all costs. This 2019 scientific horror thriller movie is another metaphor for the hierarchical nature of modern society. People on the top of the system enjoy abundant food, wine, and pleasure, but those on the bottom struggle. This movie tries to show how human nature, like greed, selfishness, and poverty, can turn us into blood-hungry demons. Filled with some real gruesome moments and disturbingly violent scenes, this is a must-watch for any horror-loving cinema-goers. Apostle 2018. Set in 1905, Apostle tells the story of a retired missionary, Thomas, who embarks on a journey to set free his sister Jennifer from a remote Welsh island who's been kidnapped by a cult for ransom. Keeping his identity a secret, Thomas manages to get into the cult, but soon his identity is revealed as he tries to take his sister away. He also meets a mysterious old lady who's later revealed to be the goddess of the island, living as a captive by the cult leader Malcolm for his own personal gain. The cult regularly offers her blood sacrifices that fertilize the land, but the goddess pleads with Thomas to release her in exchange for her favors, and Thomas listens to her by burning her body. This starts a fire over the entire settlement, with Thomas managing to save his sister by sending her off the island by boat. In the end, though, he becomes the new entity of the island by absorbing and inheriting the powers of that goddess. Cults are downright scary anyway, and this movie deals with them with a twist of its own. Human qualities like corruption, religious fanaticism, manipulation, and the pursuit of power and control are way scarier than the usual ghostly jump scares of a teen flick. As you watch this movie, you'll also ask yourself the uncomfortable questions about faith and the lengths which some will go to in the name of their religion. No One Gets Out Alive 2021. Ritual sacrifices have been on the primary sources of horror throughout history. People use various kinds of human and blood sacrifices to gain control over ancient deities or demonic creatures in order to obtain power. So it goes in this movie, a group of fanatics try to offer Amber's body to an ancient Aztec goddess as a demonic ritual sacrifice. The story begins with Amber, an illegal immigrant from Mexico to Cleveland, who, with her limited money, rents a dilapidated boarding run by a man named Red. However, immediately after moving into the house, Amber starts to see strange things all around her. Things like moths everywhere, weird satanic memorabilia, a Diablo's book that terrifies her. But with no money left to spend for a new home, she has to stay there, reluctantly. Things go truly south though when, along with two Romanian women, her house owner tries to offer her as a sacrifice to the goddess. Amidst all this chaos, Amber must find inner strength to fight against all the odds. From chilling ambience to supernatural elements, this movie makes you sit through with ease. The integral theme of an immigrant living in a foreign land, vulnerable and exploited, along with Amber's helplessness, forces her to fall into her landlord's trap and fight for her life. Though the film might be a little weak in terms of pacing, and it's a bit predictable at times, it's a very good one to watch indeed. Cam 2018. Cam is the personification of the current craze of social media platforms that have been dominating our lives and narrowing down the differences between reality and fantasy on the daily. Social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, and OnlyFans control our lives either as creators or viewers. Like any of us, Alice is obsessed with social media rankings in this movie. As a person who works as a cam girl, her rank on the site matters the most to her because it provides her with lifestyle and the money from her dedicated fans. But one day, Alice finds out that someone with a similar appearance and mannerisms has taken over her channel by hacking into her ID. After a few days, the fake Alice holds a show where she plans her suicide on the platform live. Scared and terrified by the announcement, Alice seeks the help of the police, who refuse to listen. She also seeks the help of the customer service of the web company, but to no avail either. Scared of losing her identity, she sets up a new ID and comes live with the fake Alice in front of the world to prove herself. This is a scary and triggering psychological movie that takes inspiration from the world's current situation and impactfully picturizes the online personas of the internet. It's heavily influenced and a meta movie that showcases the reality of today's generation, pressured to maintain that particular image image online and suffering from a disconnection from their authentic identity. Presenting ourselves for the entertainment of others showcases a vague passion for voyeurism and exploitation that's in a way scarier than any demonic rituals in the basement of some old lady's house. This film is a must-see if you want to see the dark side of the internet and people. (1922-2017). In the end, we all get caught. This statement defines the next film on our list. Adapted from Stephen King's novella of the same name, 1922 is probably the second best adaptation after Carrie, with a fresh score of 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. If you think you've seen the best in the genre, have a rethink, because 1922 is going to give you nightmares for a long time after the credits roll. As the name suggests, the movie is set in 1922 and tells the story of Wilfred James, a farmer who is disinterested in selling his land and moving to the city. Wilf, along with his son Henry and Henry's girlfriend Shannon, plans to kill his wife Christina, who keeps on telling him to sell the property to be eaten by the rats. The trio successfully kills Christina, dumping her body into a dry well. He also spreads lies about his wife leaving him and his son for the better. But as time passes, Wilf's property begins to be infected by a mischief of rats. His son steals a car and leaves him to rot there alone with a pregnant Shannon, but they die very soon. Wilf also loses his hand as a result of a rat bite, and he's forced to sell his property and leave his town. This film is more of a guide to horror movies. It has a perfectly written plot, fantastic work from the cast, and the patience in storytelling is commendable. It overall perfectly depicts what guilt does to the psyche of a human being. After killing his wife, Wilf suffers from remorse and paranoia, and his fading into madness is just outstanding. His past actions and overwhelming guilt ruin everything in his life. In the Tall Grass, 2019. Patrick Wilson is a horror legend. His acting in multiple horror movies like the Conjuring series and the Insidious franchise has turned him into the Scream King. But in this 2019 movie, he instead plays the baddie you never want to confront, even in your worst possible dreams. The movie starts with a pregnant Becky and her brother Cal on their way to San Diego. While passing through a small town, they stop by a field of tall grass where they hear a boy call out for help. They park their car in a nearby church, climbing into the field, and they suddenly disappear inside the abundance of tall grass. Within the field, they encounter another family, Ross, his wife Natalie, and their son Tobin, who originally was the one who called out for help. However, as time passes, it's clear that they're stuck there in some kind of loop, where time seems to pass very slowly compared to the outer world. After their disappearance, Becky's boyfriend also comes to the field and gets stuck inside. Possessed by the ancient presence that lives within, Ross tries to turn everyone into one of the deity's followers, but they all fight for their lives and find a way out of the grass. Assumedly, the tall grass in this movie is a metaphor for our lives, which are filled with unpredictability and chaos. As the characters enter deep within the field, they struggle to maintain their sense and get disconnected from the outer world. The loss of control and an inability to find a way out of that grassy maze holds an uncanny resemblance to our own chaotic lives and our weaker moments. It's a movie filled with chilling adventure, jump scares, and a realistic feeling of claustrophobia that will make you fall head over heels in love with this movie. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, 2016. There's nothing creepier than an old, crackling mansion. Those big, huge old mansions that were built by wealthy merchants have this vintage scary thing about them that can freak anybody out. Iris Blum, a retired horror writer, lives in her estate accompanied by her newly appointed live-in nurse, Lily Saylor. On the first day, Lily sees a woman dressed in white roaming around the mansion. Her employer, being an old lady, starts calling her Polly, which is later revealed by the estate manager as the protagonist of Iris's famous novel. Lily finds out that Polly was the woman who was killed in the house before her wedding by her fiancé and left to rot in the walls. From this, a black mold appears and spreads all over the house. The lady in white petrifies Lily as she starts hallucinating about being absorbed by the black mold and dying from suffocation. In the end, Iris tells the story to Lily and she mentions how in the end, even the most beautiful thing in the mortal world has to rot, and that's the essence of this movie. The bride is killed by her fiancé and is left to decompose in the house where she dreamt of spending her married life. It's a sad and a gripping tale filled with agony, revenge and years in limbo. If you like your vintage horror, well, this might be the movie for you. Marvelous verdict. Blockbuster movies like The Conjuring series, Paranormal Activity, Exorcist, Saw, well, they're some of the widely known horror movies. Many people also consider them overrated because of their big cultural influence, overexposure, and the hype set around them. However, as we've seen, there are plenty of scary, eerie, and disturbing films that don't receive enough public attention to gain critical acclaim from critics. These underrated movies also deserve eyeballs to prove their worth in the top slots of horror cinema. So what horror films can you think of that are underrated gems that the world deserves to watch? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep watching Marvelous videos for more exciting content. And by the way, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.